David Ault is an in-demand speaker and the former senior minister of CSL Atlanta. He is the founder of Kaleidoscope Child Foundation, whose mission it is to advance vulnerable children and communities worldwide with sustainable education, life skills, and fresh water. The Kaleidoscope Child Foundation operates in Cambodia, India, and Guatemala, and David also does spiritual workshops thanks to Zoom around the world. So David, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for having me back. It is truly a blessing. And I have this crazy practice when I do things like that. I try to be flexible and spontaneous. And I'm sitting over here in the corner listening to all of you, the beautiful readings and the music. And I got this image of we're all making a soup. And you know that phrase, there's too many soup cooks in the kitchen? Well, in this case, there is not too many because we're all sort of the same cook. And what makes this soup unusual is the fact that, like the way we cook here in the plane of form, we get very meticulous with the measurement of spices and we don't put everything in. Well, in this soup, you're supposed to throw everything in. Everything in. Your joy and your grief, your fears and your jubilation. And this soup is sort of a soul soup where once everybody participates willingly in putting all of these things into that heavenly broth, we all taste it and we all have the same realization. I know that I share this with your David, and that is there's something really strange about being a minister in a movement that says, like your opening principles, that we believe that there is one power and one presence, and that all is God. And I know the responsibility that your David has in crafting a community and a consciousness and a mindset that wants to bring integrity to that. And if you look at the etymology of the word integrity, you'll find the word wholeness. And I remember back in Atlanta on the pulpit, somewhere I'm going to guess around 2016, I looked out into the audience. And there were the familiar cast of characters, everybody sitting where they normally sit. And particularly people in the front, they had their special seats. And there was a man, rather disheveled, an elderly man, came every week. He had an old phone that the lens was cracked and his shoes were always scuffed and dirty. But he was one of those faithfuls that sat in the same seat every Sunday in Atlanta. And I don't know what I was talking about, but I do remember that some event had occurred. It seems that there's an event every week, isn't there? That we're being asked to amalgamate into our messages. And I don't recall what it was, but I remember as I was looking out over the congregation, I fixated on him, and he changed. In that moment, he wasn't this old, disheveled man. He had this glow about him, sort of like what you and I would imagine an angel would look like. And I don't know in speaking if I paused or not, but there was a telepathic communication between me and this man. And I realized that in some form he was an angel. He all kind of looked like the old disheveled man. Have any of you gone to the movies and seen that film, Everything Everywhere All at Once? Can't highly recommend it enough. It's all about the interchange of portals and dimensions, and everything is not as it seems. And in that moment, it was like telepathically he said, "Take it deeper. Take it deeper." And I never forgot that. As soon as it happened, it was over. But I thought, what does take it deeper mean? And I began to look at our foundational principle, which is God is all that there is. We say it, we read it, it's the form of our prayer. We recite it, we teach it in the multitude of classes. But what does it mean to take it deeper? How do you and I would say, cultivate deep roots in the seminal principle that the only reality is love? When you and I are walking around in this plane of form, witnessing things that are the seeming opposite of that. How do we do that? How do we take it deeper so that we don't just say it from a recitation or something mechanical or even intellectual, but that we find a way to bring it into what Karen was singing about, the soul? And it reminded me of a dear story where it said that there was a monk that was crying because his son died. And a student of the monk approached him and said, "What are you crying about? You know it's all illusion." And the monk took a moment and he said, "Yes, but the death of the son is the greatest illusion." And we all have our versions, right, of what the greatest illusion is. The thing within this physical plane that pulls at us and persuades us to somehow want to find a caveat in the idea that God is all that there is. And I remember after that Sunday where this man transformed into that angel and said, "Take it deeper," that I renewed a commitment that I wanted to know what that meant. I wanted to know how to become more whole, more in integrity with that principle. If it was something that I was going to recite, pray, and teach all the time, how could I take it deeper? And it has taken me on a quest. And sometimes there are great victories, and sometimes, like this week, what happened in Uvalde, I find myself getting pulled back down. And I get to throw that into the soup. I get to throw everything in the soup. The things that I think that somehow in my consciousness I have mastered, I throw that in the soup. And then the things that trigger me, the things that are so upsetting, I throw that into the soup. And it's if that soup then becomes an offering. And the offering is in alignment with this idea that I want to go deeper. Even in the apparent absence of, I want to go deeper. And I related to a story of the masterful teacher, spiritual leader, Ram Dass. The first time he ever went to India, he was horrified by what he saw. And what he would say, my Western mind wanted to immediately fix things and approach all of this stuff from a very Western mindset. Like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to make it all right. And he wanted the blessing of his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, or Maharaji. And so he went to Maharaji and he laid out all of his tactical plans about how he was going to have his Volkswagen van shipped from America, and he was going to stockpile it with goods and services, and he was going to drive through India, and he was going to right the wrongs of all of the immense poverty and disease that he was seeing. And Maharaji just looked at him and listened and nodded his head, and then he said, "Fine." Because Ram Dass really wanted his blessing, and he said, "Fine, but can't you see that it's all perfect?" And in that moment, Ram Dass said he was horrified. Horrified. And he thought, oh my God, what crackerjack charlatan have I been seduced into following? He was just horrified. And Maharaji, being this enlightened soul, understood everything that he was thinking. And he said to him, all of the things that you want to do are fine. He goes, but until you can reunite in the plane of consciousness that is aware that, as we would say, God is all that there is, or that the world is a part of a perfect patterning, or that love is the absolute reality. Until he could understand that at that plane of existence it was all perfect, then everything that he tried to do from this plane of the human form would have its obvious severe limitations, but it would also do what I think many of us have experienced, and it would burn him out very quickly. I remember Michael Beckwith once saying that something similar. He said, if we enter into systemic issues with, I think he had sort of his fist in the air, with our fist in the air like this, like we're going to fight the systemic issue, then that form of aggression will only make that issue amplify. But if we pause for a moment, we take a breath, and we do what is known to be a part of the process of that which is the visionary, that we stop for a moment and we become clear of what is the vision, to be led by a vision. Once we take a sip of that soup, we can meet any systemic issue and not forget. We can weep and mourn in our humanness, but our ethereal God nature does not forget that it's all perfect. And so it's hard to wrap around, isn't it, our Western minds, because we want it to be one way or the other. The reptilian part of our brain wants to figure out the patterns, and we want the solution based upon this, and we get all into deductive reasoning, and then we begin to realize that if we're going to dive into this principle that God is all that there is, if we're going to surrender to it, all of that has to go. And we have to find a way to reconcile a sort of multi-dimensional awareness that not everything is as it seems. Doing that does not mean that we then go climb upon a mountain and stare at our navel and just say Om and not do anything. But it means that we cultivate these deep roots in our humanness that allows us to be the visionary. I heard a great definition of a visionary, and that is you find that thing that stirs your soul, and you do that thing, even understanding that it will never be complete within your lifetime. Every time I think about that, I think about the suffragists, those women who gave themselves to this cause for equality and voter rights. And those women, those beginning suffragists, never were allowed to vote. It's like that phrase that I plant trees under whose shade I will never sit under. And you start to see a commonality, or the harmonious threads of one blanket, this cosmic blanket, that says, yes, this thread looks this way, but it's in harmony with the one organism or this one blanket. And I know that that gets really crazy to try to process. And at the time, that Sunday, when that man transformed into that angel and said, take it deeper, I didn't actually quite know what that meant. And that then is where you and I enter into this thing that we call an intention. I like to label an intention as active surrender. And so the act of surrender to any and all that was, okay, I'll take it deeper, but you have to show me what that means. You have to help me understand what it means when Jesus the Christ said, be in the world, but not of it. Because the not of it feels really glamorous and more easy. But we are called to do exactly what I'm speaking about, to cultivate that deep root, to pour everything into this spiritual soup and sup on that and get nourishment on that and cultivate these deep roots so that when the things happen, and they will, that somehow our version, our individuated persona, our activity is the bodhisattva, and we all have our way of doing that. will carry lasting meaning. We will be able to comfort the afflicted. We will be able to feed those who need to be fed. We will be able to show up in a way that we ourselves can cry and still know. I wrote down that the cultivation of a compassionate heart requires it to be both broken and operational. To be both broken and operational. And so I admittedly struggle with this, as your Reverend David was telling about my work with Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. I could understand what Ram Dass was talking about in India, when you see entire families living in a drainage ditch, or you witness the severity of illness. And there were many times when I thought, this is far more than I can handle. And yet I knew that that too was a part of the soup. That for whatever reason, my life was walking those streets and in those slums, that the work that I had begun to do to bring education to children was not something that was about me, even though admittedly in the beginning, I had to process through a lot of ego. And I had to look at a savior complex. I had to look at that subtle unconscious thing where we will sometimes hold people in need, because then that gives us an identity of helping the needy. But to go deeper is, can you begin to see beyond that? And I'll tell you this, my long-standing story about how it all began, about feeding starving children in Cambodia on the banks of this lake, it wasn't until last fall in my work that I was taken back in that moment. And what I saw, much like what happened on the platform in Atlanta, was that those children were feeding me. And that all of a sudden, that this narrative that I had created in my Western mind was not fully accurate. That on a multidimensional level, they were feeding me. They were calling me. They were a part of the process of breaking my heart and making that heart operational in a way that will do whatever work it needs to do in this human form. And so the Talmud said, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Easier said than done, right? Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And I hold a special place in my heart for people who have found themselves in this teaching of New Thought. I find that so many of us left something else to come here. I often say, in order to grow, you have to outgrow. And so there is already, I believe, in what I witness and see and feel, an innate willingness to go deeper. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. To go deeper. And so I give you that question. I imagine that you're just like me, and that there's some disheveled form in this human existence that is your own personal angel, and that in that mystical moment, you will see them differently, and you will hear something that will say, not everything is as it seems. There is a wisdom. But don't bypass the grief. Comfort the afflicted. Advocate for what needs to be advocated for. But imagine being conscious advocates. Do you feel the difference in that? Do you feel the difference in what Maharaji, Ram Dass's guru, said is, people would say, what's the fastest way to enlightenment? And he would say, feed people. love people, and tell the truth. And that piece about telling the truth, it was about remember the principle. Love people, serve people, and remember that God is all that there is. And from that, we speak a truth that has a vibration and an electricity in it, that has an ability in that moment to be a more cosmic nourishment. It is the nourishment from that soup. And I want to spend the rest of my days on this planet championing all of us to be that. I imagine the ripple effect that would come when we take on that mantle. When we don't turn away from it, but we go deeper into it. Ram Dass used to call people who did this kind of work of mercy, I think is what he said. He called them peacers. The word peace, E-R-S, peacers. A peacer must be able to look suffering in the eye and not flicker. I flickered this week. That really got to me. But again, I also remembered that my humanity is also worth nurturing. A peacer must be able to look suffering in the eye and not flicker. A peacer embraces the evolutionary process of all souls with the balance of a compassionate heart. So I thank you in whatever way in your circle of influence that you commit your compassionate heart to bringing this light and this love and this peace and this vision into the world. Namaste.
Thank you, David.
We can change the world one heart at a time. We can change the world one heart at a time. I see you, I know you. You're a part of me. We can change the world. Can you sing that with me? One heart at a time. We can change the world. One heart at a time. And I see you. I know you. You're a part of me. How about you can change the world? You can change the world one heart at a time. You can change the world. If you're putting it on gallery view, look around and say, one heart at a time. I see you. I see you. I know you. I know you. You're a part of me. And my heart is open to love. And my heart is ready to love you. So let's declare it for ourselves. Put your hand on your heart and say, I can change the world one heart at a time. I can't change the world, one heart at a time. I see you, I know you, you're a part of me, and I can change. I can't change, you can't change, we can change. One heart at a time, one heart, your heart, my heart. We can change it. One heart at a time.